We're here today with Don Alsup, media director. He started in March 2020. What a crazy time to start. Don, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Good to be with you today.
So, as is tradition on the show, we like to start with some icebreakers just to get to know you a little better. First question, you're a lover of films. What's your favorite movie of all time?
The short answer is, well, I'm going to surprise you because this is something you may not be expecting. When I was in college, I had a major in communications, but a minor in film history. And I got to be a lover of classic films. And when I say classic, I mean mostly the 40s and the 50s, but also silent films. I took some classes on that. And most people nowadays won't watch a silent film. But there are some great ones out there, and I'm going to save you the trouble of going through and watching all the boring ones and tell you which ones are the great ones.
Okay.
Okay, back in the silent era, the three big stars were Charlie Chaplin, known as the Little Tramp. Everybody knows him. Buster Keaton, known as the Great Stoneface, and Harold Lloyd. You may have seen a picture of him hanging from a clock up on a skyscraper. He's well known for that. He did all kinds of stunts. Those guys wrote all their own scripts. They produced their own films. They directed and they starred in them. And it's just amazing how great they were. My favorite was Buster Keaton. His films have really aged well because, as I said, he was the great stone face. He never changed his expression. He's kind of like modern day Steven Seagal. And that a lot of acting back then was a little overdone and his was underdone. So it looks really good today. His greatest film was called The General, about a train during the Civil War, and it has some incredible stunts in it. Back then, they didn't really have any good visual effects, so they had to do all their own stunts. He broke almost every bone in his body. There's a scene where he gets knocked off of a train with a big wash of water, falls on the track. He broke his neck in that scene. He got back up and finished the film. And he's just an amazing guy. There's a short he did called Cops. It's 18 minutes long. If you can watch that on YouTube, if you can watch that without laughing, you have no sense of humor. It is hilarious, and it has some incredible stunts. How he didn't break his arm. There's a scene where a car goes by at about 40 miles an hour. He reaches out his arm and grabs the side of the car, and it jerks him out of the frame sideways. And it's done in real time, no special effects, and it's just amazing. I love his films. My top 10 classic films, here they are in order. These are not what I'm saying are the greatest films of all time, but I'm saying these are my favorite films. Number 10 is Night of the Hunter. My favorite actor, Robert Mitchum, is in that one. Charles Lawton directed that. It's the only film he ever directed. Number 9 is 12 Angry Men. That is a film about 12 big stars in a room deciding on a murder case, and they sit in that room and debate the case for an hour and a half. And that sounds really, really boring, but it's one of the most well-done movies you'll ever see. Casablanca, that's one where they lucked into one of the greatest films of all time. They were writing the script the night before they were shooting, and somehow it turned out great. Psycho from Alfred Hitchcock, one of the greatest horror films of all time, really super creepy. Some Like It Hot was, in my opinion, the greatest comedy film of all time with Marilyn Monroe. Double Indemnity, Barbara Stanwyck, great film noir. And then the next three are very predictable, but you can't pass these up. Gone with the Wind, number 4, Wizard of Oz, number 3, Citizen Kane, number 2. Most people consider Citizen Kane the greatest film ever made, but my favorite, number 1, is Sunset Boulevard. Gloria Swanson, who plays a washed-up silent film actress who's trying to make a comeback, and she is a washed-up silent film actress trying to make a comeback, so she's not really acting a whole lot. William Holden starts the movie off dead, floating in a pool of water, yet he narrates the film somehow. Erich von Stroheim is Gloria Swanson's butler, and he directed her films earlier in his career in real life and in the film. He's also her first husband. Just an unbelievable film, almost perfect, and it just shows you the vapidness and shallowness and hollowness of chasing after riches and fame. Really great film. And then one other thing I wanted to say was some of my other favorite films are all the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. I love all of those.
You talking about the silent films. I've seen some behind the scenes footage showing how they did the visual effects of like the Charlie Chaplin and stuff like Buster Keaton especially. And it is, I mean, it truly is astounding, the creativity that they had in creating those stunts. I mean, it really is, like, if you can go on YouTube and all these other places to find it, it really is fascinating.
There's one scene in a Buster Keaton movie where he's standing in front of this big 2-story house and a hurricane comes by and it blows the entire front part of the house over. And there's a tiny little hole there. It's a door.
Mm-hmm.
and he's standing in just the right position so that that gigantic front of the house, 2 stories, falls, and he goes through that little tiny hole in the door there. And of course, they measured that all out and tested it, but there was no room for error. If he'd
Yeah.
have been off a couple of inches, it would have killed him.
Yeah.
So he was willing to take that risk for that shot.
I've seen that one. Doesn't it doesn't it tip his hat or
Yeah,
something? Like
yeah,
barely touches it. Yeah,
yeah.
it's crazy.
There was barely any room for him to go through.
Yeah. Well, so that's fantastic, Don. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't say The Exorcist or Poltergeist. I'm a little surprised with you. I just got to be honest. I'm kidding.
Those are good too.
I'm kidding. So next question, keeping in the same vein, is that what's been your favorite theater experience, seeing a movie in the theater?
I would say that any of the like really big screen movies, I'm amazed. The thing that I liked about the older films where they put all of their effort into a great story and great acting, but the newer movies, sometimes they'll have a really, really good story and they'll team it up with amazing special effects.
Mhm.
And so some of the Star Wars films, the Star Trek films, all of those that have the real eye-popping special effects, I enjoyed all of those. I don't go to the movie theater nearly as much as I used to because I can watch them at home, but occasionally there'll be a huge, big, eye-popping special effect film, and I really do enjoy seeing that in a big movie theater with the great sound and the great picture in there. Another thing that I've noticed a lot is a lot of the Christian films that are doing well now at the theater that I really enjoy going. I saw the Big George Foreman movie at the theater not too long ago, and I just thought that was great story. Really enjoyed it. There's another one out right now called His Only Son, and I was amazed at how good that film was and how beautiful it was for a $250,000 film.
Oh, wow.
They said the average Hollywood film cost $50 million. That one cost $250,000. And the guy spent 3 or 4 years just making it as absolutely beautiful as he could. And with the few characters that he had, making it into a full, great story. It had a beautiful surprise ending to it. And he ended up making $30 or $40 million at the theater
Wow.
with it. So with that kind of success, they're going to let him continue and go through all the Old Testament characters and then move on to the New Testament after that.
Okay, so kind of keeping with the movie theme, what's a book that you would love to see created into a movie? And this can be a remake of a movie that's already been a book.
Well, one of my favorite books of all time is C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity.
Mhm.
And I would love to see somebody tackle something that pithy and that deep and see what they could do with it in the movie theater. That would be a real challenge to make that into something entertaining.
Mhm.
But I would love to see somebody try and tackle that one.
That's really cool. That's really great. So my last question, and this is kind of deviating from the theme a little bit, but not too much. What's some advice you would give to someone who's starting out in tech?
Don't do it? No. No, I'm just kidding. It's a great career, and I have really loved it, and I'm glad my life turned out the way it did. I started off working in radio for about the first 10 years of my life, and I just really enjoyed that, and I'm glad I did that while I was young. I was able to do that, and it didn't pay much, but it was great experience and so much fun. I've never had more fun in my life, and you moved around to different jobs quite a bit, but it taught me kind of how to get along with people really well and how to get by and make something work and sound good on a really low budget. And then after that, I worked kind of in the business community for almost 30 years and learned how that works and how to fit in over in that environment. And then the last 3 years here at Christ Church. I'll be honest with you, it's kind of a stressful job over here, but I love doing it and I love the people over here. And it's the most fulfilling and meaningful job I've ever had. I'm glad it worked out that way because when I was young, I had a lot of energy and I could get by without much money. In the middle part of my life, I did better financially and yet still got to work in the media area. And then here at Christ Church, I just kind of like trying to finish well and do good work here and move forward and help everybody that I can and just do excellent work. You know, Jesus Christ died on the cross for us. We owe him no less than our very best all the time. And I'm trying to finish strong and do well and make it as long as I can here. And then try and train somebody, bring somebody up, nurture them, disciple them so that when I'm gone, eventually they can take over and do a good job and keep the momentum going.
That's really great, Don. I appreciate you sharing that. So, to get more in depth into your story, let's go all the way back. Okay. Where are you from?
I was born in Robert Lee, Texas in 1961, January 4th. My parents, when they got married, they were so poor that the first Christmas when they were married, my mom gave my dad a jigsaw puzzle, and my dad gave my mom a wool cap. And they probably couldn't even afford that, but they splurged because it was Christmas. And they were both in education. My mom was the vice principal at St. George's in Germantown for 25 years or so. My dad was the principal at several different Christian schools. I went to many of those growing up. And one of the things that they did for me that I can never repay, owe them so much for, is they brought me up in a Christian family and gave me a firm foundation and got me started right. So many people nowadays don't have that, and they kind of struggle, and they're trying to figure out what they believe about life and morality. And they had me in church every time the doors were open. And that really helped me out and got me started on the right path.
So you were born in Texas, and then you mentioned Germantown. What brought y'all to Memphis, Tennessee region?
Well, my dad got a job teaching there in Texas, and eventually most of our family was from the Memphis area, and they decided to move back to be closer to family and got jobs here in the Memphis area. And we lived in a couple of other places, lived in Florida for a little while, up north a little while, but most of my life growing up, it was here in the Memphis area. And they were both the first people in their families to go to college. So education was really important to them. They had us going to some really nice, good schools in high school, and then really, really encouraged us to go to college and graduate when we got that age.
So siblings? Do you have siblings?
Yes, I have two brothers. Mitch is 2 years younger than I am, and he builds media rooms for upper level clients, some of the Memphis Grizzlies. He helps build media. He started his own company, semi-retired now. And my brother Chris, he and I were actually born in the same year. I was born in January. He was born in December. And he is a pastor and also builds sets for churches' Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas plays. He's a painter, really talented. He sings. And so he got a lot of that part of it in his life.
Seeing that all of you kind of went into a creative avenue, was creativity really encouraged when you were a child?
Yes, everything that we tried to do that way. Chris could also play guitar. Anything in that area, they always encouraged us and supported us. My nephew works in media also.
Wow.
And so it was just something, somehow all three of us got interested. And I can tell you how I got interested in media at the beginning.
Yeah.
When I was, probably 7th or 8th grade, my parents gave me this really great gift. It was an AM tabletop radio. And I just loved that thing. And I played with it all the time. And at night, the stations would go a little bit further on AM. And I would try and pick up stations in Chicago and different areas. And I just loved listening to that thing. I was just fascinated by it. And listening to that and playing with that radio is probably the reason why I decided to go into radio later on in my life. When I was growing up, they had some incredible disc jockeys in the Memphis area. Had Rick Dees, Ron Jordan, Ron Olson, and I listened to them growing up and was kind of inspired by them. And actually, later on, I got a chance to work with a couple of my heroes. Worked with Ron Jordan at WHBQ, and also got to work with George Klein at WHBQ. They were both great guys, very, very talented, and they were super nice to me and helped me kind of get started.
So as a kid, were you pursuing this kind of career in media, and was that your hobbies as a kid? What were you doing as a child?
I used to, when I had spare time, I would call the radio station and talk to the disc jockeys and make requests and ask them for advice. And then actually when I got into college is when I started with it. I was, I think, a freshman in college, and my mom told me, she knew I was looking for a job in radio. And she told me she heard that there was an opening at this mom and pop radio station in Collierville, WMSO. And so I went by there and talked to them. And surprisingly, they gave me the job. And I ended up working in the afternoons for a couple of years, and then they moved me to the morning shift. And I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and did my shift from 6 to 10, and then went to college after that. And I never did get used to getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. That alarm clock woke me up every single time. And it paid, I think, $5 an hour. So I would pour my heart out for 4 hours, 6 to 10 a.m., and get a fresh, crisp $20 bill at the end of the day. So it didn't pay much, but it was a lot of fun and it was a great experience. I remember my greatest fear was oversleeping and getting to work late because I was the only one there. I turned on all the equipment
wow.
and ran the station about 8 o'clock. Everybody else would get there. And I remember one time I woke up and I just started out of bed and looked over at the clock and it said 6 o'clock. And I said, oh no. And so I jumped up out of bed, grabbed my keys, got in the car, and went racing down the driveway. And about halfway down the driveway, I remembered it was Saturday.
Oh no. Oh no.
So, anyway, I don't think I was ever late getting to work.
Good for you. Well, so it seems like that your interests were pretty honed in from an early age as to what you wanted to do with your life. I mean, even in high school, was that kind of your focus and you knew what you wanted to do with your life?
Yes. Ever since probably, I guess, 7th or 8th grade,
yeah,
I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And that's the direction I wanted to go.
This interest in radio, was it because of the music that pulled you in, or was it just the actual concept of like a DJ and the personality on the radio and all the like technical components that surrounded it? What was it about it that drew you in?
I think it was both. Listening to people like Rick Dees and Ron Jordan and George Klein growing up, I was just amazed at what they could do and how they could entertain people and how much fun they were having. I was thinking, man, this has got to be the most fun job in the world. I grew up out in the country on a farm, and I helped my parents out in the field raising animals. And it was really, really, really hard work out in the hot sun. And I said, I'm not going to do this for a living.
Can't blame you.
I remember I helped my granddad one summer, and he had this big garden patch. And we went out there and picked butter beans for 10 hours in the hot summer sun, and then put them in bushel baskets and put them in the back of his truck and drove into Memphis and went all the way downtown to Scott Street and sold them for, I think, $5 a bushel. And I said, okay, this is not what I want to do.
No.
And so I kind of went the other direction, and listening to those guys, I said, these guys are having so much fun. It's so great. And I also love the music.
Mm-hmm.
I love music. And back then they would play top 40 music and R&B and the 60s stuff and 70s music. And I loved all that. And the technical part of it, running the board for yourself, that kind of scared me a little bit. I didn't know if I would be able to do that or not. But once I got in there and started doing it, it was really fun. I enjoyed doing it. It was kind of like a game and a challenge and making it all work and not make mistakes. When I worked for that mom and pop station out in Collierville, that guy had the cheapest equipment you could possibly have out there. He had a soundboard from like the 1940s. I think it was World War II, something, big old black one with giant knobs on it. It was a lot of fun doing that. I remember one time he had a 10,000 watt transmitter in the building, and I would come in every morning and flip the first switch and then wait 5 minutes for it to warm up and flip the second switch. And two funny things happened with that. One, I turned on the first switch and then went in there and got all my materials ready. And I was so focused on that. At 6 o'clock, when it was time to go, I got on there and I was really giving it as good as I could go. And I'd been going about 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, and the phone rang, and one of my friends called me up and said, how come you're not on the air?
Oh,
and I said, what? And I forgot to flip the second switch. So nobody got to hear that. That was some of my best stuff.
That's not even as bad as the 6 a.m. So you saved yourself a little bit. Goodness.
That's right. And then the other funny thing that happened with that transmitter is one time when I turned it on, it had 4 large bulbs that were like super bright, and they would all 4 come on once it got warmed up and going. And one morning when I did it, only 3 of them came on. And so at 5:45 in the morning, I called the station owner and I said, hey, the 4th light didn't come on. I don't think this thing is going to work. And he goes, oh, just open up the front of the case and stick a screwdriver in there and jiggle that thing. And I said, dude, that's a 10,000 watt transmitter. I don't think I'm going to do that. And he goes, all right, I'll come up there and do it. So he came up there and fixed it, but I was not willing to risk my life for that.
I'm glad you didn't, Don. So did you go to college for this degree?
Yes.
Where did you go to college, and what was your pursuit?
University of Memphis. I had a communications degree, which taught me a lot. There were some radio classes, but then it was just kind of a mass communications overall degree. And then, like I said, the minor in film history. I took classes on silent films, horror films, film noir, more modern films, and really, really enjoyed that, and while learning how to work in radio and a broader communications background. Later in the late 80s, I went back to school to State Tech. It was called State Tech back then. It was at the time one of the top 10 two-year universities in the United States. And they had a great computer lab. I wanted to learn how to use computers and be a programmer. And so I went there and I applied what I had done at University of Memphis. So I got out in 1 year and was able to graduate and learned the most valuable class I took was called Intro to PCs, where it went through the entire history of computers, how it got started, very first programmers, all the what's a bit, what's a byte, how everything works. And that really helped me understand how computers work. Nowadays, almost every single job requires computer knowledge. So it was so helpful. And I was able to graduate from there and then started at a computer software company, but I worked in many different areas in that company. I worked in support for a while. I was a trainer, outside trainer, inside trainer. I was a programmer for a while. And then I worked in AV media for about the last 15 years that I worked there.
So you graduated college, you went to work at the radio. You were there for about 10 to 12 years.
Yes.
And then you moved in, that's when you went to the technical school to learn about PCs, and that's when you moved into the software. Am I getting the story straight?
That is exactly right.
Awesome.
I worked in radio till I was about 30. And I said, you know what? One of these days I might want to get married and have a house. And so I might want to do something that's a little bit more lucrative. So I went back to State Tech, got my degree there, and then started working for a software development company in the Memphis area.
What year was it that you left radio?
Well, I stayed for another year after I worked for the software company. So I think I left in about 92 somewhere.
Okay.
I worked from about 81 to about 92.
So radio is still pretty popular at the time that you left.
It was the last days of mom and pop radio. It's really changed since then. It was all live people working at that time. You couldn't get around it. One of the reasons I decided to leave was because I started hearing people talking about automation, and that's kind of what it is now. Most of the radio stations nowadays have a live guy in the morning, and then the rest of it is voice tracked. Somebody down in Florida is recording all their breaks, and then they put it into the computer. You can't tell it's not a live person, but they're just paying some guy by the hour to record all the breaks, and then they put all the music in. And most of the day, it's just computers running the radio station. Of course, that saves them tons of money. Yeah. Audience has gone down a lot since the 70s and 80s because most people are listening to their phones now,
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at the heart of the question was, I mean, you could see the writing on the wall as to where the direction of this was going.
Yeah. I could tell, okay, they're going to automate this stuff. They're not paying anybody anything now. The top 1% are getting all the money and everybody else gets the scraps. It's kind of like anything in entertainment. And so I started saying, okay, let's move in another direction. And that was the big thing at the time was computers. And I wanted to learn how to do that. And that turned out to be a good move for me and my family.
Okay, so you did that for a while. And then what brought you to Christchurch? What were you doing before Christchurch and what brought you here?
Okay. I worked for this software company here in the Memphis area for almost 30 years.
Wow.
It was kind of a mom and pop company for the first 25 years. And some of the people I worked with were in my Sunday school class. I was best friends with a lot of the people up there. The owner of the company was a good friend. I really enjoyed working up there. It was great. And they were great to me. Like I said, I started off in support, taking calls, helping people. They made me an outside trainer, so I flew all across the country showing people how to use the software. Then when I got married, they made me an inside trainer, so I didn't have to travel as much, which was really nice. And then I was a programmer for 3 or 4 years, kind of enjoyed that. And then they said, well, why don't we're going to kind of start an AV department here and produce our own videos and things like that. And so I moved over into that area, did that for 10, 15 years. I had a podcast there and I helped with that for about 10 years. Really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. And it was a great company. And first 25 years were great. And then a big conglomerate bought them out. And they pretty much cared about the bottom line a whole lot. And so about every 6 months, they'd lay off 5 or 6 people, 10 a year. And I made it through 4 years of layoffs. And they cut the company from 100 to under 50.
Wow.
And I made it through 4 years. And then my turn came and they got rid of our whole department. And so I'm in my late 50s. And I said, okay, we have been very prudent and I have saved up enough money for retirement now. I can do anything I want to. I'm 58 years old. I can go do something for 5 or 7 or 10 years, and something that I'm not really super concerned about what the salary is, because we've already saved up for enough for retirement. And I'm going to find something I love doing and I really enjoy it. And so I said, I've always wanted to work for a church. I would love to work in media at a church. My former church, I volunteered in the media department over there for about 3 years and really learned a lot. And they really helped me to kind of prepare for this job. And I probably visited 100 churches. And what I found out is 98% of them have a volunteer media guy. And the ones that are paying somebody, he's been there 20 years and he's not giving up the job. And so I just kept looking and looking and looking. I saw a job here at Christ Church in the media department online, and I applied for it online, and I never heard anything back. And so I said, well, I was driving around one day. I said, I'm just going to drive in there and go talk to him and see what happens. And so I drove in and I said, can I talk to your media guy? And they said, sure. And so they brought Matt down and he talked to me for about an hour, and I showed him my resume, and I just got a job review, and it was like the best one I'd ever had. It was like a 95% approval rating, and I gave it to him, and he really liked it and he was impressed. And they had gone through several people recently. And so I kept talking and came back and visited, did several interviews. And it took 2 or 3 months to get through all the paperwork, but then they eventually hired me, and I started in March of 2020. And I did one live service, and then bang, COVID hit.
Yep.
And it was crazy. And they pretty much shut the whole church down. And so what we did was, I started coming up here and recording all of the elements of the service every week. So I'd come up and record the sermon, and then we'd record all the music, and then we'd record all the liturgy, and then I'd take it and make it into a video and then post it online. And this is one of the ways that I know I'm in God's will and God wants me to do this, is because all my training was in video production. And it was like, could this have timed out any better? God is just showing me, I picked you for this time and this place and this purpose. And we did that for 3 months, and I about had a nervous breakdown. It was so stressful. And some of the music guys would take their phone and record their part of the song. And so I'd get 7 or 8 videos and put them all together and string them and have the music track underneath and then cut them so that they would pop in at different points on the screen, kind of like we did with a lot of those COVID videos back then. And it would take me 2 or 3 days just to do the songs. And then we get the sermon done and get all the rest of it done, and we get it posted online. And I finally got to where I said, okay, I'm kind of in a groove, and I'm going to be able to do this. And then they said, well, hey, well, let's add another service. Let's do a contemporary and a traditional service. And that got really hard, and we started doing that every week. I'll be honest with you, that first year I worked 7 days a week. I could not get a break because it was so hectic, and they kind of threw me in, and the equipment wasn't really working, and had to figure it all out and everything. The worst one I remember was Easter Sunday, and I got it finished at 3:00 in the morning on Saturday night. And it ran 6 hours later at 9 on Sunday morning. And I told my wife, I said, I'm going to bed. I'm too tired to watch it. So it all got done. And once we got back to the live service, it kind of calmed down a little bit after that. But it took me, I'll say, a year before I felt really confident about, I know where everything can go wrong and how to get everything fixed and make everything go really smooth every single week. But now we're kind of in a groove. And Rob Halford, who does the sound and helps me with a lot of other things as well.
As someone who was on staff as well in March of 2020, I can attest to Don's perseverance and just the answered prayer that Don was during that period. I mean, it really was such a trial by fire during that period, but it was, how could we have made it through that time without Don? It truly was God's provision in that. And you really speak to that well. It was such a blessing to have you on staff and to have started when you did. I want to go back to something you were talking about when you were talking about the layoff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to that for a minute. When you were talking about it leading up to just being okay with it, my question was, what were the challenges in that period? What was the heartbreak of losing this job you'd been at for so long? But then as you're talking, I'm hearing you were okay with it. Yeah. God eased your heart in that time. Can you speak more to that?
Sure. I remember the day that happened. Well, first of all, there were three people in our department. My boss and one of my best friends, he's still one of my best friends, Matthew. He comes in here and works with me still on the weekends here at the church. And they were just laying people off like crazy. And he was on vacation, Matthew. And I noticed my boss, the general manager of the company, was in there meeting with him for 2 days. And one time when I walked by, they closed the door. And so when Matthew came back, I said, they're about to get rid of one of us. And Matthew said, oh, I don't think so. And he went in there and talked to Joe, and he kind of smoothed things over. But I knew something was coming. There it was. A couple of weeks later, they let him go. And it was a couple of years before my turn came, but I knew it was going to happen eventually. They were just laying off so many people. They were eventually going to come to our department and cut us loose. And that's what happened. And I came in that morning, and one of the big bosses came by and said, we need to have a meeting. And I said, okay, I think I know what this is about. And he didn't say much. And we went back there and talked. And he goes, it's not about you. You're doing a great job. We love you. But this is a business decision. It's a money decision. And we're going to have to let you go. They had a nice severance package. And I told him, I am totally cool with it. No problem. Some of the people I heard went in there and got mad. No good in doing that. And I told him, I said, we've been really careful with our money. We saved up enough for retirement. This is going to free me to go and do something that I really enjoy with the last few years of my employment. And I'm looking forward to it. And I shook his hand. I told him, you're a great guy, and I enjoyed working with you. My boss at the company is one of my best friends. He was in my Sunday school class. We still keep in touch and contact. But even with all that, when I drove home, it was a weird feeling, because for the first time since I've been a teenager, I didn't have a job. And I sat at home for a couple of days just thinking and kind of ruminating and thinking about what I was going to do and what I wanted to do. And after 2-3 days, I said, okay, I'm going to start visiting every church I can find in Memphis and go start talking to them. And I'll be honest with you, I really enjoyed the process of going out and talking to all these people and meeting them. They were like super nice. And there were a couple of things that I thought for sure were going to work out. They told me they were going to work out, and then they didn't work out. And that's after about 2 or 3 months of that. That's when I started going, well, what is going on here? Is this all random, or is there a plan for this? And I was telling you about how music was real important in my life. One of the songs that was real important to me was that Waymaker song. It was real popular back then, and it has lyrics in it. Even when I don't feel that you're working, you never stop working. And that kind of became my theme song during that period of time. And I said, God, I know you're out there. I know you got a plan for my life. Please help me to be patient until, I find it. And sure enough, it wasn't in my time, but it was in God's time that it worked out. And it was the perfect job, the perfect place, exactly where God wanted me to be. And it's never been more obvious in my entire life that was God's will. When you get older, I'm 62 years old. When you look back at your life, sometimes when you're going through things, you don't see the plan. You don't see God's plan. You don't see his hand. But when you get older and you look back, you can see it a lot more clearly. And all that stuff working in radio, that was preparing me for what I was going to be doing at the software development company. And all that really, really helped. I did a podcast there for 10 years, and all that radio experience was incredibly helpful for that. And then learning all I did about computers over there, coming to Christchurch, it's all computer driven. And if you don't understand how that works or the latest technology, and if you don't stay up with it, you get totally lost. So all of that prepared me for what I was doing here. And then all of that video production and sound and everything that I did at the software company was perfect training. And I mean, 1 week and bam, there you go. We need you to do video production for our church and keep all the services going. And I had all the equipment at home, high-end computer, video production computer, and all the software just sitting there at home ready to go. And so it all just worked out perfectly, and God's plan was just like super clear for me at that point.
Wow. Thanks for sharing, Don. So we've talked a lot about your professional life. let's talk about your personal life for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned her at the beginning. Tell me about how you and Debbie met.
Well, she is one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. We met in Sunday school class at Bellevue Baptist Church. She was an assistant district attorney for the counties around Shelby County doing child support in that area. And we met in Sunday school class and just hit it off really well. It's funny because when I was young, my parents were always telling me, don't get married too early. A lot of people get married real early and it's a mistake and this and that and the other. I remember when I turned 30, they go, it's okay if you get married now. Almost waited too late at this point. I didn't get married till I was 32 years old, but she was, again, absolutely the right person for me. I dated a lot of different people and they were okay, and there were some nice people along the way, but she was absolutely the right person, and it didn't take me long to figure it out. We only dated 6 months, and then we got married because I knew she was the right person for me. And she's just been the greatest blessing ever in my life. I'll tell you a story about her. We had a really great marriage, but one of the things that changed both of us is about 7 years ago. I had just finished watching the Super Bowl at church and came back home and went to bed. And she got me up at 3:00 in the morning and said, I'm having a horrible headache. You have to take me to go get checked out. Something's wrong. And I said, okay. And so we were going to go to the clinic and get a shot. She just wanted to get a shot for her headache. She gets migraine headaches occasionally. And fortunately, they were closed. And we went to the emergency room. And the doctor up there said, I want to do a scan on your brain. And she said, no, I just had one of those done not too long ago. He goes, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So he went and did the scan. And when he came back in the room, he had this horrible look on his face. And he said, you might want to go say goodbye to your wife. She has 3 brain aneurysms. And he said a third of the people that have this never make it to the hospital. A third of them never make it to the operating table. And the ones that have the operation are never normal again. So that was not a good day for me. And so she immediately went to the hospital in Memphis and she had an 8-hour surgery that day. And they said it's very dangerous and she's not likely to be normal again after the surgery. And so she had the surgery, and the software company I worked for was so nice to me. They let me stay up there with her for 30 days in that hospital. She was in ICU for 30 days. And there were some good times and some bad times. Sometimes when she didn't know who I was. And the whole time I just had this quiet confidence, optimism that things were going to be okay. And she stayed in there 30 days. She had to have some additional things done because she had some pressure on her brain. But I stayed up there with her pretty much I'd go home at night at midnight and get up at 6:00 in the morning, come back up there. But I stayed up there almost the whole time for 30 days with her. And she is one of 2 people in the Memphis area that had that serious operation and made a full recovery. So we were just so incredibly grateful for that. And it took 2 or 3 months for her to totally get back to normal. But now you can't even tell. She is completely back to where she was. And it's just amazing. And one of the things that happened during that time, of course, it made both of us think about our lives and how important things are and how short life is and how you better get serious about serving God and doing things for him while you still have time. And one of the things I did, I prayed during that time and I told God, if you give her health back, I'll do something that I've never done before. And I decided I'd go on a mission trip. I'd never done that before. And so after she recovered, I went on a mission trip to South Dakota and got to share the gospel with several different people. And one guy made a decision for Christ. And that was just an awesome, fruitful, wonderful trip. Just really, really enjoyed that. And those people out in South Dakota, a lot of them had never heard the gospel before. And so I got to share it with them for the first time. And it was really great. And then I also got to go on a mission trip to El Salvador. Our company was sponsoring a child development center in El Salvador. It's one of the poorest nations in the world. And also, I got to go and visit my sponsor child down there. And he was 8 years old at the time. And it was just an amazing, eye-opening trip. He had never left his village before. They put him on a bus and drove him down to San Salvador and took him to this beautiful park. It reminded me of Hawaii. Beautiful trees and swimming pools and a soccer field and a zoo. And he just had the best day of his life. He'd never been swimming before, and he got in this beautiful pool and swam around and had these goggles on. I kept having to lift his head out of the water so he'd breathe. He was just having such a wonderful time, and he didn't want to go eat lunch. He wanted to stay in the pool. And so it was just an amazing experience. I remember we went to one of the child development centers, and those kids had absolutely nothing, zero. They were like pushing an old tire down the street as a toy. And they were the happiest kids you'd ever seen in your life, most well-behaved kids. We went on Amazon and ordered some baseballs and basketballs and footballs and put them in a mesh bag and brought them down there to them. And I was inside the building doing some crafts with the kids, and the kids outside started just screaming. It sounded like a Beatles concert or something. I said, well, somebody's hurting the kids. And I went out there to see what was going on. And the guys were bringing the balls out of the bus. And those kids were screaming because they were so excited to play with those balls. And so that just taught me, kind of showed me how spoiled we are here in America and how those kids are so happy and so fulfilled and so well behaved, and they have absolutely nothing down there. So it's not about riches that make people happy. It's about relationships and especially a relationship with God.
Again, Don, thank you so much for sharing. So as we kind of start to wrap up, I have one more final question for you. You've been at Christ Church for a couple of years now. What excites you about the future of Christ Church and your role?
I'll just say this. I love my job. I love the people up here. I love working up here. Pastor Shane, when he was here, I really enjoyed getting to know him and helping him. Matt and Bo, when they were here, I really enjoyed working with them. They were like brothers to me. They were so good to me. We're just doing everything we can to try and make things look and sound and feel professional. We owe God our very, very best. Slides that we put up and the videos that we play, everything that we do, we try and not distract from the worship service. Anytime there's a mistake or somebody does something that they shouldn't be doing or something goes wrong, people think about the mistake instead of worshiping. We're kind of like the air conditioning. As long as everything's working correctly, nobody notices you. When you make a mistake, that's when people notice you. So we try not to get noticed. And Pastor Paul and Brother Chris are both just doing such a wonderful job here. There's just really a lot of momentum going on, and I'm just really excited to be a part of that right now. The church is growing. The sermons are great. The music is great. There's an excitement here at the church, kind of a revitalization going on right now. There are plans for improving things and making things better. And one of the reasons I enjoy Christ Church so much is it's so mission-minded. There's so many things that they're involved in the Memphis community, helping people nationally, internationally, adoption. There's so many different groups. The Joy Prom that goes on here at the church, that's one of the best things Christ Church does, in my opinion. We did that not too long ago, and boy, did they name that thing right. The just absolute joy that the special needs people have up here at that prom, having such a good time. We did that, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago on a Friday night, and when I got home from that, these muscles behind my ears were hurting. And I was thinking, that's weird. Why are those muscles back there hurting? And it was because I had been smiling so much that night. There's just so many great things going on at Christ Church. I love being a part of it. And I want to be involved in making this place better and continuing it on. It's not about us. It's about a legacy and handing it down to the next person and having it continue to grow and be successful and win the Memphis community. There's so many things going terrible on. We just lost 2 church members recently. So many bad things going on in Memphis. Memphis desperately needs revival. And I think this church is part of the solution and part of the thing that can make. Politics isn't going to do it. What this church is doing is what's going to turn Memphis around and make it a better place to live, I think.
Well, Don, you're wrong about one thing. You are an HVAC system, but we do notice you. And we do. And that's as we close, I want to say on behalf of the congregation, thank you for your hard work. I mean, as someone who's seen you behind the scenes, I can say that confidently that very few people on this staff hustle harder than you do. And there's very few people. So on behalf of the congregation, thank you for being an HVAC system that works and works often and works well and very, very rarely breaks down. So thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for sharing today. Thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability in what you shared. So thank you again, Don.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.